Hello, and welcome to the Full of Ship podcast. Real answers to real problems. With your host, Kyle Henderson, CEO and co-founder of Vision API, a podcast dedicated to demystify the chaotic, often turbulent world of ocean freight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of Full of Ship. I'm Kyle Henderson, and today our guest is Brian Kempisty. Now, Brian, you're with the company Portex Logistics, and I want to give you a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background. From what I understand, you've been in the logistics space for quite a few years now.
Yeah, basically, it's all I've ever done. It's the only real adult job I've ever had. It was an interesting beginning. I was 19. I needed a job. I went to the internship office. They're like, I don't know if we can get a paid internship as a sophomore. And they said, call this guy. And I started working for a freight broker. And that led to me starting my first company when I was like 23. And I ran that for 7-8 years, sold that, did some consulting work. And we started Portex Logistics October 2nd of 2017, focused on culture, service, tech, and trucks. And it's just been a wild ride.
Now, that focus on culture, service, tech, and trucks, that actually sounds a little bit different than some of the logistics organizations I have encountered through my far less lengthy career in this space. But maybe you could tell me a little bit about why that kind of approach, why those values, why did you want to run a company with those four values?
Well, the first was some of the people that had come along with me to start Portex Logistics. They had bad experiences in the industry, and they're like, we know there's a better way. We know there's a better way to treat the people. We know there's a better way to treat the customers. Why can't we just be proactive and nice? Our service, our SOPs, we knew what people wanted. We knew the questions that they were going to ask. So why not just tell them those answers up front? The technology piece, a lot. When I say the logistics space, primarily the trucking space is working off of no technology or old technology or systems that were built in the 90s, and they just don't have a current look and feel. They don't give the consumer, the customer, a lot of confidence when they log into this clunky system and they can't find anything. So that was really important to us. And, being a logistics company or a broker these days is like all the rage, this fast growing brokerages. And although we have a brokerage component to our business, and it's a large portion of our business, having some of our own trucks and legitimizing our business as we actually have some of the assets. If you need a solution in place in Savannah, we'll go buy the trucks and put them there. You need a solution in Oakland, we'll put them there. We just did an acquisition in Denver. They were our biggest provider in Denver, and they had their trucks and they were looking to exit the market. And we're like, yeah, come on board. We'll take you on. So we're using those assets to augment the brokerage and not just being a pure brokerage. And I think one of the other differentiators is we don't have a sales crew dialing for dollars. We promote, we're subject matter experts. We're going to tell you this is how it works. This is how the ports work. This is what you need to do. And we win a lot of business, not dialing for dollars, but strictly being the subject matter experts in the industry.
Now, I heard you mention ports. There's lots of different types of trucking. Is there a specific type of trucking service you guys focus on? Is it LCL, drayage, FCL drayage? Is it FTL, LTL, all of the above? What's your focus?
No, we have a couple of focuses, and I think that's part of our success and part of our service. There's people out there that claim they do everything. We claim to do some things very well, and we stick to those silos. So we are known for drayage, transloading, and trucking. That could be a local drayage or a regional drayage move. But in many instances, it's combining those multimodal transportation moves. So we're actually tracking the vessel, we're tracking it through the port, we're getting the appointment, whether it's our own truck that's draying it or an outsourced drayman. We get it back to the warehouse, transload photos, GPS track it all the way to delivery. So it's drayage, transloading, and trucking. We like to say we can accomplish drayage, transloading, and trucking 2,000 miles in 2 days. And that's something that not everybody specializes in. So that is the main focus. We do have another division within PortX, which has only been out for a year, which is really a unique solution. It's called Carrier 911. And Carrier 911 works with a lot of those same clients, but instead of port recovery, it's airport recovery and expediting. So somebody could fly in 2 pallets from China to LAX, but it needs to be in Austin, Texas next day. We'll go to the airport, recover it within 2 hours, GPS it track to destination, and ensure delivery. So we're kind of building that silver bullet for the port recovery and the airport recovery, and that's really been our primary focus.
I mean, that's pretty differentiated. I haven't heard of that kind of white glove on-demand service. I mean, there are classic forwarders here in the U.S. like Expeditors who really kind of promote their ability to go above and beyond. But that sounds like Carrier 911 sounds like it is, well, one, a level above what I've heard in the space, and two, desperately needed at the moment.
Well, there wasn't a national provider that was the silver bullet for this. And I know we had talked about, how did this all come about? And it was a great story. And we got lots of great stories at PortX, but one of our first employees, Shane, I was walking behind him, and this is like 6 months in, and we use something called Carrier 411 to check the credentials of carriers, make sure basically their insurance is up to date, they don't have any bad reports, this and that. I'm like, Shane, Google Carrier 911. Who's got that? And we did. Nobody had it. So we just bought it and put it on the shelf. And then the pandemic started and all this air freight started coming in. And it was like, okay, it's time to supercharge this thing. Let's get the marketing materials ready to roll, and let's build out the infrastructure, and then let's sell it. And we've done it. It's becoming extremely successful.
Now, I'm going to want to dig into Carrier 911 a bit more in a minute, but I have some prepared topics I wanted to go through as I was digging through PortX. Now, you'd mentioned earlier that kind of part of your culture is a bent on being really tech-driven, technology-driven organization. And from what I understand, you were pretty early in focusing on collaboration technology. Now, why did you get a view, or how did you build that perspective that might be a strategic advantage? And you can tell us a little bit about, the tech stack behind it and why you invested in offering that kind of capability.
Yeah, one, we knew there's a couple things that we wanted in the tech to start with. One was ease of use. It needed to look the part. I mean, looking the part is half the battle. That does matter. We wanted something that integrated the tracking and the platform, and nothing against, a MacroPoint or a FourKites, but we wanted everything within one system. And then if we could make it easy for our customers to use and collaborate, we talk about tamping down email by 80%. Email in the logistics industry is a beast right now. And to be able to take core customers and actually work with them in the platform and get rid of the email was really an added benefit for us.
So from a technology perspective, what were you leveraging, and what is maybe a good place to start? What is that user experience? When you say collaboration, tell me a bit of a story that from the customer's perspective, what does collaboration mean when they're actually like using your app? And when we say app, is this a desktop app, a web application, a smartphone app, all of the above?
It's all of the above. We partnered with Turvo right out of the gates before we started in 2017. They were only built for truckload point to point. And I went to Jeff, who I knew, and I was like, what do you think about multimodal transportation and trying to tie all these pieces together? He's like, it sounds like a great idea. I was like, well, you got the best platform and we got the idea on this multimodal. So let's work together to make it happen. And we did, and that's kind of how we've really worked with them over the years to continue to add on to the enhancements to make it more user friendly, more information, to build out more APIs, and have everything a little bit more automated.
Any fun stories about unexpected benefits or unexpected interactions?
Yeah. So I guess we had a 100 container project from LA to Oklahoma. And normally we would receive delivery orders. We would email back to them that we received it. We'd send them tracking updates every day. They'd say thank you via email. And there's 5 emails per container every day. That's 500 emails a day. So they shared their information via their orders via the app, via Turbo, and all the collaboration, all the communication went back and forth between Tom and the customer. And then additionally, we could share with the warehouse, we could share with others in the supply chain a link to the shipment. So everybody within the shipment was in the know, and we were doing it all with no email. We were doing it all on the platform.
Gotcha. Now, as you're mentioning before, one of your strengths is the drayage side, dray, transload, truck to destination. So that means your team, yourself, I'm sure as well, has gotten some exposure to the situation in ports here in the U.S. Could you tell us from your perspective, what has been the reason ports have been getting so much attention? And maybe you can clear up causes or the details of the types of congestion you're seeing.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into, why, right? Why there's more imports than ever before. That was because of the pandemic. It was also because Amazon's been driving this for the last 10 years, and it's been continuing to grow. So we see that trend continuing. Then you had the pandemic and certain ships didn't come over. I've been, saying for over a year, pounding the table, that these charters are a bad, bad idea. And that is what's caused a lot of the issues on the West Coast, is these smaller foreign steamship lines are coming in. They have no place to dock. They haven't made a plan. You end up recovering the container. You get it delivered. They won't take the empties. The empty sits on a chassis for 60 days. That creates the chassis shortage. And that's really made, a lot of the issues that we've seen. One of the other things that I don't know if we look at from a logistics community enough is who's responsible for what. The steamship line is getting all this money to bring these containers over here. The steamship line hires the terminal. It's not like this magical terminal that just exists. The steamship line hires them. And basically, when the steamship line offloads the container, they punt and they say, oh, it's the terminal's issue. But you hired the terminal, so you have to take some responsibility and put some skin in the game and not just go back to Asia to get more containers. So the terminals are struggling because of space infrastructure, the union negotiations. How much can we automate? How much can't we automate? We're one of the least automated countries, developed countries in the United States. And then you've got the truckers on the tail end of this, and the truckers take a large brunt of all the inefficiencies that are really caused up front by the steamship lines. To further exacerbate matters, we are one of the only countries in the world that has this ridiculous chassis pool system. If you go north of the border in Canada or you go to Europe and you're a trucker, you own your own chassis. You go pick up the container, you deliver it, you get rid of the container, you continually use the chassis. It's just like a dry van or a flatbed. And why the United States hasn't been able to evolve into carriers owning their own chassis is a big issue. The reason that they haven't is we are, in the drayage world, probably 90% of the drivers are owner-operators and very small businesses. So they don't have the capital to necessarily go out and buy this equipment. So those are the issues, and how we get together is the steamship lines, the terminals, the truckers, and the BCOs all need to come to the table and work together, and it can't be every man for themselves.
Curious, I've seen a number of chassis leasing companies come up in the last few years. I haven't seen any of them necessarily get a lot of traction per se. Why has there not been some kind of middle ground, or that need really met and provided for? That's something in between owner operators owning the chassis outright and having to work with the pools. Surely there's some kind of middle ground.
I'm sure that there could be. I guess I don't have the exact answer for this. I mean, it's unique, kind of the story on how it happened. The steamship lines used to provide the
Yeah.
chassis,
Yeah.
and they're like, I can't make any money doing this and maintaining it. This is a terrible business. So then that went into private equity, who saw an opportunity to figure it out and make some money, and they probably have to a certain extent. But I don't know if there's not enough money involved in it for them to come up with a different solution. Or, usually in a free market, you don't want to say that there needs to be government involvement, but you know, they were talking about this $1 trillion infrastructure plan, and I was saying, well, if you want to spend $1 trillion, why not give some grants to some drayage companies to buy their own chassis?
Yeah, and even you go out there and look at chassis quality. We're talking
It's
about
terrible.
hardware that has been out there and beat to death, not just for like 1 or 2 years, but like chassis that have been out there 7, 10 years. Like some of them are older than the containers at times. And well, one, and when in a pool system, which chassis do you think people are going to try and pull or give away first? And just the maintenance around that as well. Yeah, I mean,
Well, a couple things that go into that, right? We have some pictures that I share with customers. Here's a pool chassis, and here is a Port X chassis.
yeah,
Our tires all match. The thing's not rusted out, and the lights work. And you go to a pool chassis, many times the tires are all mismatched. They don't wear well. That causes flats. And you know who's responsible for reappointing the delivery? That's the trucker. You know who's responsible for getting a new tire and repairing the thing?
yeah.
The trucker is responsible for for repairing the crappy chassis provided by the pool. So you have one flat tire in a week and you charge whatever you charge for a chassis. People are like, well, why does it cost so much for a chassis nowadays? Because you get one issue and one maintenance issue, and it's on us to fix it.
One last question to kind of dive deeper into this. So in the past that's not so far away that we can't remember it, but certainly not recently, the carriers and the hardware assets were far more centralized underneath the carriers. And then there was this period of kind of heavy decentralization where it's many more, let's say, links in the logistics chain. I imagine this is kind of like a pendulum effect. We look at market forces. What's going to give, and what do you think is going to change over the next handful of years? I mean, we're usually really bad at like predicting what will happen in a year, but we're usually pretty good at predicting what will happen in 10 years. What do you think will be true in 10 in this asset problem set?
I don't think it's going to go back to the centralized arena. I don't think we can. I think those days are long gone. I do think things like AB5 in California, which is trying to get all the drivers as employees, that was a thing. I don't think that's actually going to work. I think you're going to see more of the Uber effect in the trucking business, which is going to further drive the decentralization, because they're going to want their autonomy. They're going to want to make their own hours. They're going to want to choose the loads that they take. They're going to want to, dictate the paycheck that they're going to get. So unfortunately, I see it going the opposite direction and, further being pushed out. And that's one of the reasons we want to be asset based in those markets, and not like I said, we're definitely not even close to 100% asset based, but having some trucks to be a backup when the market has shifted or drivers don't want a certain lane is really important in providing that consistency to the client. So from a Port X perspective, we think it's going to be further decentralization, further Uberification of the business. But if we have those light assets and we can be available to make sure that we can recover the really important stuff, I think that's going to give us a leg up. And I think a lot of other companies are going to look into that. If they can get over the compliance and the liability issue, they're going to realize that that's a sound business strategy.
I want to get back to Carrier 911. And you shared a little bit about the kind of genesis. There was quite a bit of pain around managing air freight and kind of transitioning of the trucking and really needing someone who is going to get in there and be reliable at fixing problems. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, it's only been a year. So, how has Carrier 911 changed from what it was on day one to what it is today? And where do you see it going? And how is it going to respond to what's happening in the market and what's happening in logistics overall?
Where has it come? I mean, we started it with a thought where we didn't have everything put together. So we had to actually go put together the operating procedures, some of the load matching software, and where do you get these? Because not every driver is created equal, right? So when you're dealing with air freight and expedite, these guys got to be on the money. They got to know what paperwork is required to pick up. They have to be willing participants in the technology and the application.
Yeah, which ones
they
are
have to
fixers?
Willing to upload the PODs. So we did our diligence, and through technology now have a network of highly reliable sprinters, straight trucks, and 53 dry vans. So that's kind of been the evolution of it. And where do we see it going? I mean, one thing that we can be really proud of is our average response time is 6 minutes to an email on Carrier 911. Our average recovery time is under 2 hours to get something picked up. And that sense of urgency, there are people in the marketplace and there's big players, but they're just not as quick and as nimble as we are. So we just need to stay quick and nimble as this thing grows.
And I've built out two-sided marketplace businesses in the past. I'm kind of curious. You had the data to kind of find your gold star trucking partners, but how challenging was it to kind of match both sides of the market? I mean, you have Carrier 911. I'm sure you had to promote that in some way that, hey, we will fix the problem. But how were you able to balance the supply of how much solution you could give to the demand that was coming in the door?
We just have there's been a capacity issue in general in the trucking market and truckload market in the United States. And there has not been for the Carrier 911. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, on the full 53-foot dry van expedited, they're getting a little bit of a premium, those teams.
Mm-hmm.
But on a Sprinter van and a straight truck, it opens up the avenue to all sorts of drivers, right? You don't have to be rich to go get a Sprinter van. You can make your own schedule. You can go with your buddy, your girlfriend, your wife, and it is the Uber of moving this stuff. And they like that independent contractor nature of it. They know what is expected of them, and I think there's a high demand for that. I see people, whether it's a younger couple or maybe an older couple or an older guy and his buddy, they're like, hell yeah, let's go to Seattle. It's going to be a great time. And they go, they make their delivery, they decide where they're going next, and they're not in the forced dispatch world. And, a lot of them come from the big truckload marketplaces, and the forced truckload world wasn't that much fun.
And these drivers are primarily underneath Portex, or is it kind of a load board, but a private load board?
Yeah, it's a load board, and
Okay.
it's
invite
a
only kind of load board. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I'm kind of curious how your customers have been feeling about the recent congestion market activity, and what's your kind of state of being right now? Hair on fire, firefighting, or have things kind of normalized for them in this congested environment? What are they foreseeing as the kind of near-term and medium-term risks for their logistics, especially things that need to move by truck?
Yeah, there is still some crisis management type stuff that's going on, vessels that get delayed and you need to transload and expedite things, or, where carrier 911 and the PortX traditional service come together is, yeah, can you grab 2 skids off of that container and get it over here ASAP because we can't wait for it. So we're seeing some of that, but really, I see the world starting to normalize a little bit. I think people are building up their inventories. Um, they're dealing with the congestion. We're slowly getting better. The industry, I would say, is slowly getting better. The number of charter vessels has dropped dramatically, which is helping things improve. I don't see rates coming down or things like, it's not going back to the way it used to be. Um, One of the things about the way it used to be was inland point intermodal, or putting a large percentage of these containers on the rail to destination. However, that is going to normalize some. These steamship lines are making so much money and will continue to make so much money that they are not going to want those containers to disappear for 60 days.
Yeah.
So your transloading is the way of the future, and the steamship lines are going to drive that by the IPI service that they're allowing. So we think that transloading business is here to stay.
Curious, what do you think the steamship lines are going to spend all this cash on?
I don't know.
Because it's usually a boom or bust cycle for them, right? It's usually like feast or famine. And this recent boom has been a boom to boom all booms.
It's the biggest boom of all time. But we've also, the alliances and the way that things have been consolidated, they're able to control capacity better than ever, other than those rogue charters, which are done because people learned that didn't work. So I think they're going to manage capacity very well. I think the rates are going to become inflated or stay inflated. And they're going to invest in technology. They're going to invest in e-commerce fulfillment solutions so that they can offer more of an end use. And they're going to focus on logistics companies that can provide silver bullets like we provide. They're going to want to, whether they organically build them out or buy them. I think you've probably seen the M&A space in logistics has been through the roof over the last year.
Yeah, that's a curious topic. Do you think they're better at buying or better at building? And it may depend on what carrier.
It may. I mean,
because we're asking them to do a lot of change that they have not necessarily done before. Yeah. And buying ain't easy because it's integration, and building ain't easy because you need the builders.
Exactly. And you need entrepreneurs to be builders, but you need to, if they're going to buy somebody, they need to make sure that they got to maintain the culture, and they got to maintain some U.S. culture versus an Asian culture or European culture, because most of these companies are outside of the U.S. They're not U.S.-based steamship lines.
Yeah.
I don't know. It'd be interesting to see where it goes.
Is there a U.S.-based steam line anymore other than Matson? Remember, APL got bought up CMA, what, 6 years ago or so?
Yeah. I don't think there really is. And Matson's not very big.
No, it's got that specialty route out to Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or their fast boat. They have a fast boat program that comes from China over into Long Beach.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're pretty specialized.
And I think, is Crowley U.S. based? I'm trying to recall.
I couldn't tell you. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Well, again, they're not that big.
In terms of like the buy, build, investing all that cash, it seems like technology is going to be the hot spot for much of that. Let's get into maybe the role of kind of tech around container tracking events and getting kind of visibility into tracking shipments that are moving in containers, specifically around PortX's perspective on this. So when and what do you need to know about a containerized shipment to be of the greatest value to you and your customer? And how does that translate to smooth drayage operations?
Yeah. So it changes by segment. So you can easily track the vessel when it's on the water. That's easy because the ship is getting pinged and there's
Yeah.
various services to know where that is. Knowing when the vessel is berthed, knowing when the container is offloaded, knowing when it's off customs hold, knowing if there is a TMF or TMF fee,
hmm
peer pass due. Like all those things are really, really important. And I know a lot of people are working on integrations to put all those things together. We don't have that silver bullet yet, but we've got operators that are super savvy, and we go check about 90 websites a day on behalf of our customers,
Yep.
and we put notes in the system so they know. And I think that these technologies, as you know well within your business, that's part of what you're doing, that stuff is on the way, and it'll be interesting over the next year or two to see how it works, because we just had an example this morning where the TrayPack website said one thing and the Steamship website said
Yep.
another. So managing the exceptions is going to be, how many are there and how hard is it and how do you do it and how much do you rely on technology? That technology over the next couple of years, I'm sure will get figured out. But that's the one pitfall right now, is managing the exception.
Yeah. Today it's a lot of different parties who are kind of have access to the information, or the providers of the information. There's lots of different interfaces and locations and ways of getting the information. And there ain't a lot of standardization around it. And there are not a lot of centralized
No.
systems. It's
Well, like,
it's a
how about
challenge
this?
by itself.
We can pay demurrage on our customers' behalf at the Port of Long Beach, but we can't at the Port of Savannah. Like, why?
Yeah. The money's still green. What's the issue?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Now, so in regards to that smooth drayage operation, so like, what's kind of best case that's an actual case right now when things go right? It sounds like you have a team of people who are kind of manually checking for this information and they're getting the right information. Is that kind of the best method for today right now, going kind of above and beyond for the customer in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are going to see the technology integration is going to happen. We're still going to have to figure out those exceptions and manage it. And without manually doing some of that checking, you're going to miss some of those exceptions. But what we see for smooth drayage operation, of course, we say, hey, we're the oh shit guys. We're here to, like, crisis management, get your stuff picked up fast.
Yeah.
But our best customers that we actually are partnering with, we know when freight is leaving Asia or Europe, and we can forecast. We get an idea when the vessel's coming in, and there's way more to drayage than getting a driver, and that's one of the misconceptions, right? And I try to tell all of our customers, one, we need to make sure that there's going to be chassis available. We have to make sure that there's drivers available. We have to make sure that there's yard space available, because a lot of these ports around the country, you can't just go return a container whenever you want. If you're transloading, you have to have warehouse space. If you're palletizing it, you need to have pallets on hand and you need to have labor. So this forecast that we get, this 2 and 3 week lead time, allows us not to just look at driver capacity, but the whole thing. Because if your warehouse doesn't have pallets because there's a pallet shortage,
Yep.
or you don't have yard space to park the container, like, if you don't put all the variables together, you don't get a solution.
Yeah.
And
If you're missing
you
one
hear so
ingredient,
much,
you can't bake a cake.
yeah, you hear so much in the media. Well, it's just there's a driver shortage, and there's just so much more to it than that.
And that's a challenging thing from the media perspective as well, because there are 12 reasons and they're all good reasons, but it's never just
Yeah.
one reason.
Yep.
Yep. And I'm curious, you were mentioning before, there's been this increased kind of consumer demand, and it's been increasing, especially on the e-commerce side, the Amazon effect, a surge of imports, these rogue charters. But on the other hand, we've also seen kind of an increase in these kind of black swan weather events as well, like the recent snowstorm Izzy impacting air freight. I'm sure it's also impacting, I-95 traffic. And how is kind of visibility in general helping companies manage these black swan events? And maybe a better way, I feel like black swan is not even like the best term anymore. It's just how do you how do you use visibility to manage uncertain times, which as things get more complex and more bodies involved, more parties involved, the uncertainty is almost expanding as as kind of as quickly as the volume of trade from my perspective. But how do you use visibility to manage the unexpected?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, knowing when these these weather events, are coming is great because maybe you can make a little bit of an alternative plan. And hey, let's air freight a couple pallets in here, make sure that we're covered so we don't have a line go down. But I think more so, and hopefully this will stick because it usually goes in cycles. But you got to diversify your ports of entry. Like you can't just use LA or just use Seattle or just use Charleston. Like we had a client the other day that is looking to open a new distribution center an hour or so outside of Charleston. Well, and they're like, well, I want to bring all 100 containers per week into Charleston. And we're like, well, what if something happens at the port of Charleston? Like, even if you want to put 80% there, put 20% in Savannah or 20 in Savannah and 10 in Norfolk. Like, you have to diversify what you're doing. So when these black swan events or these emergencies happen, that you're not all of your eggs are in one basket. And usually what happens is people get burned. They had all their eggs in one basket. They diversify for a couple years. And then they're like, oh, well, we could be more efficient and our pricing might be better. And then they go back to the old way they used to do it. And then the same thing happens all over again.
Yeah. Why is it that it seems to be a cycle around the priority of agility in kind of supply chain and logistics network design for these companies?
So this is my philosophy on it. I'm not sure if I'm 100% because I'm not a corporate guy at all. But in general, when you work at a big publicly traded company, your CEO cycle is like 5 years. So, and maybe even your C-suite for that matter, right? So when you have this turnover every 5 years, somebody wants to put their own stamp on whether it's sales and marketing or supply chain or whatever it is. So they're like, oh, well, look at all these efficiencies or the savings that I got in the supply chain because of what the old guy did by diversifying. And then that guy does good for a couple of years and then gets burned. And then the next guy goes back the other way. I think that's why there's cycles is because there's management cycles and new management comes in and they look for ways to be more efficient. And that might be in how do I tamp down some cost? And that all looks good until the black swan event happens. And then, then they're in trouble.
Speaking of cycles, speaking of unexpected events, what are your predictions for 2022?
I think it's going to get better. I mean, I really think those who are proactive, those who are using the technology, those that are embracing and looking at some of the issues that we've had over this year, I think it's going to be a pretty smooth year. I don't think the rates are going to go down, but I think things are going to continue to normalize throughout 2022. I still think the rates are going to be high on the ocean side and the trucking side, but I think we're going to start to kick the pandemic into the rear view mirror. We have a couple things that are coming up which are going to make the next several months still sticky, and that is the Olympics. You've seen the lockdown in China, and they don't want to be on the news for COVID events. So they're going to continue to lock down throughout, I think, the Olympic Games. Then you're going to have Chinese New Year. Then you're going to have a big rush of freight. Then that has to get done. Then you're going to have normal peak season. But then once we get past that, I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you for being a guest on Full of Ship. And are there any last comments or thoughts you want to share before we wrap this up?
No, just thanks for having me. We love to talk about our business and solutions and, real solutions like collaboration with the steamship line, like Chasis, like diversification, and having the opportunity to talk about that. It's always our pleasure here at PortX. So thank you.
Well, it's been our pleasure. Thank you as well.
Thank you for joining Kyle and his guest on the Full of Ship podcast. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time as Kyle continues to demystify ocean carrier tracking with his future guests.